Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Choate from Mount Royal University. Today I want to talk about 5 opposing forces that exist in the world of child protection. And they're all important forces, and child protection case managers are attempting to control or work with these forces on a daily basis. Sometimes they do a good job at it, and sometimes they're not so good job at it. We certainly hear about the times when they don't do a good job about it. We hear about those in the media, and those are the cases that hit the front pages of papers and the headlines in television and other media. So let's look at these 5 opposing forces. The first one is the family preservation agenda. This is an important part of the child protection world because we recognize that the legal goal of the vast majority of legislation throughout the Western world is to preserve family. And so what that really tells us is that a major part of the goal of a child protection worker is to find ways to keep children living with their parents. That doesn't, of course, always work, and what that does create from time to time, therefore, is discussions or thoughts about how do I keep a child safe outside of the family. This is really the second opposing force, and that's the safety of the child. And the safety of the child and the preservation of the family do not always go together. Particularly when you have large numbers of dysfunctional families that child protection tends to work with. So oftentimes you are faced as a child protection worker with trying to decide which is of greater importance in the moment, the safety of the child or the preservation of the family. Now, it seems obvious that you would say safety of the child, but in fact it's not obvious. And so what begins to happen is that in an attempt to try to keep children with their family, child protection workers are often attempting to have to sort of modify their understanding of safety in a particular situation. However, their attempts at family preservation, which is often a laudable goal, can also be fraught with a number of attempts to return children to the home. So what happens is we get, and this is our third force, is we get this cycle going on. Child is unsafe, child is removed from the home, interventions are put in place in the family, things get better, child is returned to the home, and child is in the home for a period of time, things deteriorate, child is brought out of the home again, interventions again are put into place in the family, child is returned home, things stabilize and improve, over time things deteriorate, child is taken out of the home again. This kind of cycle really works against the successful development of the child. So the third force is really about finding ways to stabilize the child. Should the child be in the home, or should the child be out of the family care or out of parental care? This is a very difficult choice, and unfortunately the family preservation agenda often results in children being returned to the home too many times in an attempt to keep a child connected to family. Now, the family preservation agenda has a really important ally, and that is that research tells us that children don't do as well in alternate care, particularly when alternate care is unstable. And that's our fourth force, and that's the capacity of child protection to provide a stable option to parental care. And the legislation often doesn't really frame that as a choice for the child protection worker, but it is a real choice. And we need to contemplate, is the state a better parent than the parents themselves? Can the state provide a better option for the child than the parents are providing? In essence, when we remove children from parental care and place them into alternative care, we are engaging in a bargain as a society with that child. The bargain is we're going to provide you with a better place for your emotional and physical development than the place that you were in, the family home. Now, we don't sit down with the child and sort of articulate that bargain, but that is in essence the bargain that we are laying out for the child. And we're laying that out for the family as well. Too often, however, we don't hold up our end of the bargain as a society, because what happens is that we move the children from place to place, creating instead an unstable environment. The same is true, of course, when we engage in that cycle where we're moving children back and forth between home and alternative care. In other words, we are creating an unstable environment. Instability, by the way, often exists as well within the notion of permanency. So parents who have rights in the courts to oppose the direction of child protection can protract that final decision for the child for years, thus leaving the child in a position of limbo. Am I going to go back to home? Am I going to go back to my parents? Or am I staying in this foster home? Or am I going to a different place? The courts need to find a better way to move cases through the system so that the child can get permanency solutions much faster. Too often we'll have an initial trial, and that will result in an unsatisfactory conclusion for the parents, who then appeal, and that whole process can take several years. I think we have a fifth opposing force, and it is actually part of the family preservation agenda, but it's kinship care. Now, when we think of kinship care, we tend to think of it in a very positive way. After all, that keeps the child with the family. But it's not always positive, particularly when kinship care is involving forces within the family that are in opposition. Let me give an example to illustrate the point. Think of a child who is apprehended from parents and are then placed in grandparental care. The grandparents have a strong view about the behavior of one or both of the parents, and as a result, they ally themselves with what they perceive to be the right thing, the safety of the child, which puts them in opposition to the parent, and can cause the kinship carer to be in alliance, therefore, with child protection. This can be a very difficult triangulation and can cause a lot of resentment within the family system. There are also cases where we have to recognize that intergenerational patterns may make kinship care an inappropriate placement. The point of this discussion really is that as child protection, there is an obligation to provide as stable an option for a child with a permanency decision as soon as possible. These opposing forces, however, make case management really challenging. And it is trying to manage these opposing forces that can far too frequently lead to problems with child protection workers' decision making. They're walking tightropes, and they sometimes just don't manage that tightrope well. And sometimes it's not actually their fault. There are many occasions where the system doesn't make it possible for them to manage that well. And remember that a child protection worker isn't the only one making decisions about a child. The parents and the other caregivers are as well, but most importantly, so are the courts. And so there is, if you will, a sixth opposing force, and that's the interests of all of the parties who are involved in the system. Now, I don't pretend that I have ready answers for these things, but it is part of a long discussion that in the policy area of child protection we do need to be considering. But I want to suggest to you that family preservation is important, but not at the expense of the stability of the child. Perhaps the thing that we should be most focused on is finding a direction that will provide the child with stability as quickly as possible. That may be the most effective thing that we can do for the child.